When discussing Doom earlier this year, lead project programmer Billy Kahn noted, "Our goal is to be the best looking game at 1080p at 60 frames per second. And after spending countless hours blasting through this marvelous game, it would seem that id Software has reached its objective." This is John from Digital Foundry, and today we're going to explore the brilliant new take on Doom and the technology driving it. As is tradition for a new id Software game, Doom brings along with it id's latest graphics engine, this time in the form of id Tech 6. As a massive overhaul of the ambitious but problematic id Tech 5, this sixth iteration brings back dynamic lighting and shadows in a big way, alongside key enhancements to its materials, post-processing, and effects systems. It looks unlike anything else on the market today, and it all works beautifully. What makes id Tech 6 so unique for the id Software of today, however, lies in the people behind it. This is the first major engine revision that was not helmed by the legendary John Carmack. Instead, we have a mix of id veterans and experienced industry programmers who have worked together to bring id Tech 6 to life. Many of these programmers, including lead renderer programmer Thiago Souza, previously worked on CryEngine. So it should come as no surprise that id Tech 6 is very well made indeed. But before we take a closer look at its feature set, let's start with the basics. One of the key features that defined id Tech 5 was its adaptive resolution feature, and that remains in effect here in Doom. By dynamically adjusting the resolution based on load, both consoles managed to stick closely to the 60 frames per second target, while on the PC, users can manually adjust resolution scaling. PlayStation 4 manages to hit its 1080p target at almost all times, to the point where we failed to encounter any adjustments to the vertical resolution at all during normal gameplay. For all intents and purposes, the general experience is a full 1920 by 1080. Xbox One, however, falls lower than this most of the time. It can hit a full 1080p in select circumstances, but generally hovers closer to 900p, with dips almost reaching 720p at points. Now, this could be an issue for Xbox One owners during normal gameplay, but thankfully, the game's anti-aliasing manages to overcome the lower pixel count, creating a game that simply looks softer as opposed to more aliased. id's new temporal super sampled anti-aliasing solution effectively tackles shimmering, edge aliasing, and in-surface aliasing across the board, resulting in an incredibly clean overall presentation. Along with Uncharted 4, Doom offers one of the most effective anti-aliasing techniques we've seen on consoles to date. The PC version also offers a number of additional anti-aliasing options as well, including FXAA, SMAA, and standalone TAA, along with some various other combinations. I'm a big fan of TSSAA, but those that want a sharper image at the expense of artifacts may actually prefer another option, and of course, Doom is happy to oblige. What really defines Doom for us, however, is the way in which the game is able to throw together a huge variety of effects seemingly effortlessly. When everything comes together, it's poetry in motion. Effects that you would not expect to see in a 60 frames per second shooter on consoles are thrown around with reckless abandon, and aside from the aforementioned resolution difference, the results are identical on Xbox One and PlayStation 4. GPU particles are in effect here, spawning beautiful sparks and particles across the environment and off of nearby objects. Remarkably, these emitters are standard across all detail settings on the PC and both consoles. Other particles, however, such as smoke and dust alpha textures, accept shadow and light from the environment, which helps ground the effects in the world. There is an option to adjust particle quality in the options menu here, but this only affects the resolution of the aforementioned smoke and dust particles, not the GPU particle emission. Here we have the PS4 and PC version in a side-by-side view, and the PC is using the Ultra settings in this instance, while PS4 is actually set to high. Interestingly, the results here are unrelated to the shadow quality setting. This is all tied to the particle quality setting. A very high quality bokeh depth of field is also used throughout the game. It becomes visible during select scripted sequences or when bringing up the weapon selector wheel. The Crytek influence is strong here with the wheel and depth of field combination, and it's perfectly utilized on all three platforms. Screen space reflections are also present and play naturally off the surface materials in all versions of the game. When combined with the beautiful specular work, surfaces exhibit real depth that adds greatly to the realism. While the differences appear subtle, when I compared the two I found that the console versions use the medium setting, as we see on the PC. The higher settings actually improve the accuracy of the reflections, but it still looks great on anywhere from medium through ultra. When you drop the settings to low, however, screen space reflections are eliminated completely and only cube maps remain. You can also go one step further and completely disable reflections if you like. Then we have motion blur. The effect here is one of the best we've seen in a game. The sample count is very high and eliminates gaps that you might see at 60 Hz. It creates a sense of fluidity that benefits the high speed of the game. For those that prefer to play without motion blur, however, you can disable it on all three platforms. It should also be noted that motion blur does not actually have a real impact on frame rate, but disabling it can actually reduce the degree of resolution scaling you encounter on consoles. Chromatic aberration also makes an appearance, and while we typically dislike the effect, it manages to look excellent here. It's a subtle implementation that fits the mood of the game, and it does so without compromising image quality. But, as with motion blur, this effect can be disabled on all three platforms. Then we have materials and textures, which is where we see some of the greatest strides over the previous engine. id Tech 6 uses virtual texturing, also known as mega textures, just as with id Tech 5. But thanks to additional memory available on consoles and other optimizations, the results are markedly improved across the board. The texture resolution is higher, and pop-in is less evident throughout, while texture assets themselves are more complex. You will sometimes notice textures drawing in as you spin the camera around, just as we saw in Rage, but it rarely becomes an issue here. Looking back at Rage actually, lighting data was baked into pretty much every texture in the game, and many objects didn't even feature normal maps. It was very fast for the time, but we're glad that Doom moves away from this approach with surfaces that now react properly to light. Materials are also aided by the move to a physically based rendering model, which helps metal, stone, and plastic all appear more natural and realistic. This is especially effective on the hellish creatures you spend the game fighting. When you examine them in the model viewer, it becomes evident that a lot of love has been poured into creating each and every one of them. Shadows are another major addition here. id Tech 4, which powered Doom 3, utilized shadow volumes to great effect, but Rage and id Tech 5 pretty much dropped world shadows altogether. With id Tech 6, however, shadow maps, as opposed to shadow volumes, have been introduced across the board and help bring back depth to the world that was absent in id's last game. What's impressive here is the quality of the filtering algorithm used. Even when using lower settings on the PC, shadows always appear clean and smooth across the world. Even the self-shadows on the player's weapon are clean and devoid of artifacts. The console versions appear to use the medium setting, which can sometimes impact the distance at which shadow maps are displayed, rather than the actual visual quality, which is comparable to the higher settings on the PC most of the time. Only when you set shadows to low do you see a dramatic difference in clarity. Directional occlusion also makes the list, bringing more realistic ambient shadowing to the world on all three platforms. It's another feature which Rage was lacking. Oh, and the holograms featured in the game are pretty cool. They're simply full 3D models with a dither pattern applied. It's a clever addition and it works well within the world. Then we have the animation work, which is what really separates Doom from the rest of the crowd. Simply put, Doom features some of the best animation work we've ever seen in a shooter. The way in which imps and other creatures move around the world is remarkable, and it plays right into the gameplay with enemies able to go anywhere the player can. It's a system that was actually introduced in Rage, but the open level design of Doom allows it to work much more effectively this time. But perhaps the most impressive aspect of Doom lies in how much it was able to get right in terms of game design. Modern gameplay elements are perfectly aligned with an old-school design philosophy to create one of the most exciting shooters in more than a decade. Maps are complex and require lots of exploration to fully experience, while secrets and bonus maps are now hidden all over the place. Doors are blocked by keycards, backtracking is actually fun, and the challenge level is just right. They've even included hidden levels from Doom 1 and 2 hidden within each main level of the campaign. And thanks to the inclusion of the mechanics from the new game, they actually present an interesting new challenge than when you play them with traditional Doom mechanics, so it's a cool bonus. And that's really it. More than any other reboot of a franchise over the years, Doom understands what made the originals great, and it builds on it. Scrapping the brown Call of Duty clone version of Doom that was originally being worked on in favor of the Doom we have today was the best thing that could have ever happened to the project. While certainly financially challenging for any studio, reworking a game concept when it doesn't deliver the intended results can actually help build a real classic. The same thing happened with Half-Life 1 and 2, as well as Resident Evil 2 and 4, among others. When the original game concepts were not working out, those games were scrapped and the classics we know today were built instead. We're happy to add Doom to the list of successes here. And that's really the conclusion. Doom and id are back in full force with something that feels completely fresh and familiar at the same time. It's also backed by industry-leading technology, something we haven't seen from id since 2004. It looks incredible, it plays like a dream, and you should play it right now. And with that, we're out of time. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like and subscribe. And until next time, tell your folks, buy me Doom or go to hell.